go.
Hi Titans, thank you for joining us today for our Let's Talk Budgeting webinar. My name is Jared Ventura and I am the CalFresh Outreach and Enrollment Graduate Student Assistant here at Tuffy's Basic Needs Center. Today we are joined by a special guest who will give us a presentation and we will have time at the end for a moderated Q&A. You're able to submit questions at any time in the chat to Tuffy's Basic Needs. And before we get started, I want to let you know that the webinar is being recorded and it will be posted to our Tuffy's Basic Needs website. We kindly ask that you keep yourself muted during the presentation. Without further ado, I will now hand it over to our guests to introduce themselves and begin our presentation today.
Thank you, Jared. Hello, everybody. My name is Lupe Tinoco Oliveros. My pronouns are she, her, hers, and I'm the Programming Graduate Assistant for Tuffy's Basic Needs Services. And today we're going to be talking about budgeting. So let's go ahead and get started. All right, to start us off, I have a little bit of a Zoom poll here. So the questions are, have you created a budget before? And what emotions come up when you think about budgeting or creating a budget? So we'll take a little couple seconds. All right. So today we're going to be talking about budgeting 101. What is budgeting and why should we do it? The four main budgeting elements, which include income, expenses, fixed and variable, savings, and financial goals. Then we're going to talk about the nitty-gritty, right? And then we're going to kind of end with balancing your budget and adjusting or being flexible with one's budget. So let's go ahead and start. First of all, what is a personal budget? Personal budget is a way to make sure that you will have the financial resources to do what you need and what you want to do, right? I'm pretty sure many of us have heard the difference between needs and wants. Needs being, having to pay bills. Wants is kind of going to the movies with friends, right? And a budget can help us balance those out. It's also a way to measure your financial health. So with budgeting, you'd be able to get a snapshot of how you're doing financially. Are you within your means or are you not? And if you're not, where can you adjust? Also, budgeting is a way to achieve financial goals, such as paying off debt, going on a vacation, buying a car. I'm sure that everybody has maybe a couple of items that they want to achieve financially. So budgeting can really help us get to those. All right, so why budget? So there's a couple of reasons, well, there's many reasons for why folks budget, but these are some that particularly stand out to me. So one is taking control of your finances, right? How many of us have kind of avoided looking at our bank account for weeks, right? We just keep on purchasing stuff, hoping that the money's there. But by budgeting, we wouldn't be playing this guessing game anymore. We know exactly where our money is going and also how much we have left. Also, it's a better chance of reaching our savings and financial goals. Again, with the goals, right? Many of us has things that we want to accomplish, and this is a tool to help us get to those short-term or long-term goals. And third, creating peace of mind by making sure that you have money for the things that you need or for emergencies. So life throws curveballs at us, right? Those curveballs sometimes are really expensive and they're sometimes quite out of our control. But knowing that you have a little bit of money saved for situations just like this can help bring some peace of mind and reduce anxiety when life happens. So I like this quote, which reads, "A budget is telling your money where to go instead of wondering where it went." And I think that it nicely sums up the points from my previous slide, right, about taking control of your finances and really seeing where your money is going. But this also requires a little bit of work. So let's go ahead and get into that. There are four main budgeting elements, which include income, expenses, which can be divided into fixed and variable, savings, and financial goals. So these are the four things that you're going to want to include in any budget that you do. Income is money that an individual receives, right? So for example, any type of financial aid or financial aid disbursement that you receive, such as loans, grants, scholarships, paychecks, which are the most common, any family support, monthly allowances, or stipends. Those are examples of some of income that you get. And one thing I want to point out here is that income can fluctuate. It's not always constant or stable. For example, if you receive financial aid disbursement, that usually only comes about once or twice a year, right? In January and August, that's when you have more money than usual. On the flip side of that, if you work on campus as a student assistant, usually most student assistants don't work over the summer. So there is a shortfall of income. And I just want to point this out because when you budget, sometimes you can plan and anticipate for those months where you might have more or you might have less income. And the same goes for expenses as well, which we're going to dive into right now. So expenses is the cost required for something or the money that is spent on something, right? Where income is money that comes in, expenses is money that goes out. There are two kinds, fixed and variable, and we're going to talk more in depth about those two. So fixed expenses are more or less constant. They stay about the same each month. This includes things such as rent, utilities, cell phone payments, maybe credit card payments or loan payments, tuition, right? Those tuition doesn't come around monthly, but it does come around every period or so, right? And I usually think of these obligations as non-negotiables, right? Unfortunately, we can't negotiate tuition or how much we pay for parking on campus. But on the other side, variable expenses are those that are flexed or controllable and usually vary from month to month. Some examples include personal essentials, fun or self-care items, clothing, shoes, books and supplies, or family contributions. So one other thing I want to point out here is that some expenses are determined by you. And you see here, I have 3 examples. It could be whether savings, groceries, gas, right? And what I mean by that is that perhaps you're a student athlete and nutrition is really important to you. So you set aside time each month or each week, I mean, to go out and grocery shop, right? You have a set amount of like money that you set aside for grocery shopping, that kind of would go into your fixed expenses. Whereas maybe you have a super busy schedule and you only go grocery shopping when you run out of food or when there's an opening sometime in your schedule. It really varies. So it's not a constant expense is basically what I mean. So that could go into your variable expenses. So you get to determine what expenses go where based on your lifestyles and what you feel like you prioritize. Also, like I mentioned previously, income, like income, fixed and variable expenses can fluctuate month to month or period from period, right? For example, we're coming up on the holiday months, and usually for me, those are times when I have less income and more expenses. So just like with income, sometimes there are moments or months that you can plan and anticipate for before them so that you are balanced in those upcoming months where you have a little bit more expenses or less income. Okay. All right. So savings. Savings is money that you put aside for future use rather than immediately spending it. Saving money can help you become financially secure and provide a safety net in case of an emergency. So we talked about this a little bit, but I'm going to talk about it again because I'm a big advocate for savings. And I'll share a personal example for just a moment. So growing up, I wasn't really, I didn't have a lot of positive money management experiences. So when I started earning my own income, there's a lot of lessons I had to learn about how to manage my money and how to manage my finances. I would come up with like situations, right, where I would get a flat tire or I would get a parking ticket, and it would really come down to me either having enough money for food or making sure that I pay like these fines or I pay for a new tire. And as many of you, or some of you might have already gone through some of these experiences, and as you know, there's a lot of anxiety and worry that comes with not having the financial means for being able to cover your own expenses or these unexpected expenses. And this is a lesson I had to learn on my own, but it really taught me the importance of having an emergency fund. And the way that I got started is to really save before I spent anything. That's the same advice that I would give to you, to allocate your funds as soon as you get your stipend or your paycheck, right? Pay yourself first. And also think about savings as a fixed expense. We talked about this previously in the other slide, that it could go either or, but I would really encourage to having it be a non-negotiable for you. And I think at first this can cause a little bit of anxiety by committing to like a set amount each month, especially if you're already feeling like month to month you're short on cash, and or you might not have a steady income. But my word to that is save as much as you can. The amount does not matter. It really is more about getting into the habit of allocating some of your income into your savings than it is about the amount that you're trying to save, especially in the beginning, right? If savings money is something that you quite haven't done before, in the beginning, it's critical to kind of start building and developing that habit. And as with any habit, once you start doing it repeatedly, it just becomes automatic, and you kind of don't think about it anymore. But those are my 2 cents on savings. All right, so financial goals. Financial goals are personal, big picture objectives that you set for how you'll save and how you'll spend money. For example, right, maybe you have a goal of paying off your debt, of building an emergency fund, buying a home in the future, saving for money, starting a business, whatever that may be. But and for whatever financial goals you have, I would encourage setting SMART goals. So you might have seen this acronym before. And I'm not going to dive too deep into it. There's that could be a whole workshop on itself, but like you could include in your budget. But if you first want to start focusing on the other aspects or the 3 other elements of your budget, that is also okay. You don't have to have a financial goal. You can always incorporate later when you feel like you do, or that you're ready to take those on. Okay, next slide, please. Thank you. So a budget should be purposeful, right? You should know your why. Looking at money and creating budgets can be a bit of a cumbersome task sometimes. So having a significant reason for why you're doing it can really help you ground you into actually doing your own budget. Also, it should be within a time frame. Typically, most folks go by when they receive income, whether that be monthly, bi-weekly, or weekly, but not all the time. If you're not quite sure where to start, monthly is a good option too, since many of those fixed expenses come around once a month. Excuse me. Also, being flexible. You've heard me talk quite often about how our money and our expenses change and shift constantly. So practice giving yourself some grace, and also don't be discouraged by setbacks. You can always pick yourself back up from where you left off if you feel like you've gone over budget, and just come back to it, make revisions and adjustments to your variable expenses so that you're able to find a balance again. And also, last but not least, keeping it simple. The hope is that budgeting becomes a lifelong habit, right? But the more complicated a budget is, the more difficult it is to keep up with. So like with every habit, right, starting off slow and simple is usually the best way to go. Okay, so the next step is identifying a method that works for you. And this can feel like a bit of a daunting task, especially because it might take some trial and error to find a system that really works with your lifestyle and your financial needs. So here I have a couple examples from more simple to a bit more complex. First of all is a list method. So that's basically, as it says, creating a list of your income, your expenses, your savings, and your financial goals. You can maybe keep it in a journal, keep a Google Doc, add it to your phone's notes, or you're just incorporating it into your planner. The next one is using the envelope method, where you designate certain envelopes for different items in your budget, and then you set aside that specific amount, as you see in the image there. Some folks have by personal, right? gifts, shopping, food, whatever it is that you want to categorize. There's also the percentage system. As you can see in the image there, you could go 50, 30, 20, 50. You set aside 50% of your income for your needs, 30% for your wants, and 20% for your savings. And fourth, there is more of a goal-based method. So maybe you have the budgeting thing down and you want to really focus on your financial goals. So that is another example of how you can do that by using kind of templates or setting money aside for a certain amount of time, like you see on the template there. Also, we are living in a very technology-driven world, right? Especially now, and rightfully so. It makes everyday things easily accessible, simplified, and it helps us stay organized. So one of the ways that you can budget through technology is by creating spreadsheets or Google Docs. If you're a proficient or an advanced Excel user, this might be something useful for you. As you can see the spreadsheet there. Also, Google has tons and tons of templates for budgeting. They come in various formats, but you can also use a lot of those pre-made templates that might be useful for you. That's one of the ways that how I got started. Also, apps on their smartphone. There's tons and tons of apps. I'll go over some examples in the next slide, but something I haven't quite talked about yet is about tracking your expenses. So that is one of the key elements of budgeting, right? Is when you look back at your month and you see what you've been spending on. It's kind of like those memes of like expectation and reality. Expectation, your budget is kind of where your expectations are. Reality is when you go back and track your expenses to see what have you actually been spending your money on. Folks might, look back at bank statements or maybe keep a running list, but with an app, sometimes it automatically does that for you if you synchronize your accounts with apps. Also, they give you access anytime you're carrying around your phone and a quick snapshot of where you are that day, how much you have left to spend. So those are just some examples of how people budget, the ones on this slide and on the previous slide, but there are many, many more. This is not a definitive list of examples at all. You can use one method that really, really works for you, or maybe you might use a combination of some, right? At the beginning, as I mentioned in the previous slide, it can feel a little bit overwhelming when you're trying to identify a strategy that works for you, but keep at it, right? As you heard me say, the goal is to build a lifelong habit. And so really finding a system that you can keep up with and that gives you some peace of mind is really the best way to go. All right, so some budgeting apps here. Here are some examples. Feel free to take a screenshot or take a picture of some of these for your own use. I categorize them by purpose, or so we have some apps that help you track your spending, such as Mint. Mint is a really reliable one. It's a very popular one that syncs automatically to your account. Excuse me, and updates your budget and tracking. There's also envelope-based accounts. So if you don't feel comfortable, having cash on hand with you, these apps help you kind of categorize your spending without having to take out any cash. So Good Budget and envelopes are good options. There's some investment management apps, automatic budgeting and tracking, Challenges, that's a good savings app. So you start away by saving $1 the first week, $2 the second week, so on and so forth. So at the end of 52 weeks, you have quite an amount saved. And I included some miscellaneous like Splitwise and Venmo. Those are apps where you not so much budgeting apps, but they do help you keep track of your finances and where your money is going. Sometimes they do keep a record for you. And also Pinterest. So never underestimate Pinterest. It's where I learned a lot of the tips that I'm sharing with you today. Pinterest is a great way to identify or find budgeting templates or find different ways of savings. That's also a really helpful app. All right, so this is one of the most important steps with budgeting, is to balance your budget. And you do that by taking your total income and subtracting your total expenses from it. This will give you either a positive or a negative difference. So a positive difference or positive balance means that your income is greater than your expenses. In other words, you're earning more money than you're spending. So I would caution against looking for new ways to spend your money, right? Instead, I would say focus on putting that extra money towards your savings to cover for an emergency fund or to support any future goals that you might have. Also, if you have a positive balance and you have some student loans, this is a great way to start paying back of some of your loans or consider borrowing less in the future. Also, okay, so on the flip side, if you have a negative balance, it means that you are spending more money than you have. So this, you'll want to really balance your budget by monitoring your variable expenses, reducing your expenses, and or finding ways to increase your income. But spending less can be a lot easier than earning more. So we're going to talk about some ways to adjust in the next slide. So flexibility and balance is key, right? So when you find yourself in a negative difference, you want to adjust your variable expenses first. Here I include some example, right? Like cutting back on subscriptions. You know, I don't like listening to music with ads, but sometimes you just have to. So cutting that, taking advantage of some student accounts, saving on food expenses, such as creating a shopping list and sticking to it every time you go grocery shopping, limiting the amount of Starbucks, those iced coffees that you buy in the morning, inquiring about CalFresh over at Tuffy's Basic Needs. We do have CalFresh virtual assistants where we can help you determine if you're eligible and even guide you through the application process if so. Adjusting your savings, and also using utility assistance. In the state of California, there's the CARE and the FURA Act utility assistance programs that can help reduce the cost of your utility bills. And so you want to, when you're adjusting your incomes or your expenses, you want to see what can I realistically adjust and then make those changes as needed. And I'm not going to dive too deep into it, but if push comes to shove and you've adjusted all of your variable expenses, there might be some items from your fixed expenses that you might be able to wiggle a little bit. For example, if you feel like you might not be able to make a credit card payment, you can call up your issuer or financial lender and let them know what's going on. Sometimes they might give you an extension on your due date or develop a payment plan for you. That way, if you feel like you can't make that payment, it doesn't negatively affect your credit in the long run. So those are just some ways to adjust. There's a lot more, but I think, and in the end, one point I want to make is that sometimes we think of budgets as constraining or limiting us to, doing the things that we want to do or spending our money and things that we want. But really, it should be a balance between our needs and wants, making sure that we're paying our bills on time, we have those expenses covered, but also have money and financial resources for the things that we want to do. So in a snapshot, these are the budgeting steps. If you want to take a screenshot or take a picture of them, we didn't go in this particular order, but we did touch upon each of these elements, right? So I'll go through them briefly. Determine a time span for your budget. Find a system that works for you. Review your income. Identify and categorize your expenses by fixed and variable. Save for emergencies, balance your budget, and adjust and maintain your budget, right? And with that, anticipate and plan for months where you might have more or less income or expenses. And yeah, let's go on to the next slide. So thank you everybody for listening in. I think now we're going into the question portion.
Yes, thank you all so much for submitting your questions in the chat. We are now moving on to the moderated Q&A. So one of the questions that we received was, should I prioritize saving or paying down my debt?
Yeah, so great question. So I would first encourage to budget, right? Budget your fixed expenses and your emergency savings, and kind of prioritize your savings, because if something were to come up and you don't have an emergency savings, you might end up going into more debt. So, after you have a rainy day fund that you're comfortable with, maybe then you can go ahead and tackle your debt head on. But continue, as you're saving, continue to pay your minimum payments or a bit more if you're able to. And then, as I mentioned, once you're in a comfortable spot, you can go ahead and start paying down your debt.
Thank you so much. We also received another question saying, I'm scared to have a lump sum of savings in my budget because it can be tempting to spend. What are some ways to stay accountable?
Yeah, so great question. I'm guilty of that. I see money and I want to spend it. Um, but one of the ways that I've helped myself stay accountable is to use the envelope method. This has really, really worked for me. But instead of like having just a stack of cash in an envelope titled savings, I use subcategories. So I kind of try to anticipate, okay, what are emergency expenses that I might need to pay for in the future? For example, car expenses, right? There's always a chance that your car might break down, something might happen. Medical expenses or housing and rent. Sometimes I don't know, maybe I might get evicted, or I might not be able to meet rent that month. So I try to create those subcategories and save my money that way. So if I'm ever tempted to like pull money from those, I feel like I kind of just hurt myself in the future in case any of the circumstances were to happen and I have no money in my envelope. I'm kind of in trouble. And that's the exact reason why I'm saving, is to not be in those kind of circumstances. So yeah, that's one thing that has helped me stay accountable.
Thank you so much. And another question that we received in the chat, it says, I'm really struggling with my food category. No matter what I do, I always spend more than I budgeted. Any suggestions on this?
Yeah, so I think that there are some things that can be done, but the first thing I would do is kind of ask myself, like, do I really need to rein back on my spending for food, or am I trying, or do I need to be a little bit more realistic about my food budget? So, you might be budgeting maybe too little for food and trying to constantly reach that particular number. I would suggest tracking back your expenses, maybe going back like a month or two and seeing how much you typically spend on food a month. And then that should tell you if you need to increase your food budget to fit a more accurate number that reflects your food needs. Or perhaps you find that you buy iced coffee 16 times a month, right? And that kind of tells its own story. So that would be my suggestion.
Thank you so much. And at this time, I'm not seeing any more questions in the chat. So I just wanted to take a moment to thank everyone for attending our Let's Talk Budgeting webinar today. I do want to remind you that this was recorded and will be accessible on our website next week. For more budgeting workshops, the Dean of Students Office is hosting a Budgeting During a Pandemic featuring Schools First Federal Credit Union. The workshop is being held tomorrow, November 6th, 2020, from 3 o'clock p.m. to 3:30 p.m. We also have the Price Taste Right with Titanwell on November 10th from 11 a.m. to 12 p.m. Also, before you leave, please take a couple seconds to fill out our quick feedback poll. Thank you, everyone, and we hope you have a wonderful rest of your day.